the scriptures and teaching this morning, and I would love it if we would just make the line of that last song that we just sang our prayer. We would just pause for a moment and talk to God just about how much we need Him. Because there's a lot of times that we're in touch with that, but there's a lot of times that we're not. And we live our lives as if we have a lot more time than what we really do. Living in such a way that we're just out of touch with how much we need God's grace, His strength, His courage. And so if you would just pause with me for about 30 seconds or so, just maybe even ask God just to meet you here today. And just speak to Him of what it is that you do need from Him. And then after we pray together, I'll open the scriptures and we'll finish our service. So join me as we pray. Sometimes when I'm with a group of people like this, God, and we sing songs like that, it reminds me of what I can often forget, and that is that I do need you every hour. I need you this hour. And we just ask you, God, in the time that we have that remains, that as you continue to move in this place, that you would speak to our hearts, that you would meet us each in exactly the place we most need to be met. And that as you do, that it would cause us to deepen our faith, to become just a little more hopeful about our life, and to become just a little bit more reliant on our need for you as we walk from this place to the next. But God, in this place, we confess that we need you, and we invite you to meet us. In Christ we pray. Now, most of you may not know the answer to the question that I'm about ready to pose because you've never done something like this. Like you've never heard a sermon or a message, or maybe you've never had the opportunity to speak in public. But you might be able to guess the right answer anyway. So if I were going to say to you, and for those of you who have done this, you probably have a decent idea. If I were going to say to you, what is the most difficult thing about speaking in public or about giving a sermon? The opening, the body, or the close, the conclusion? What would you guess would be the most difficult thing about speaking in public or giving a sermon? Let's, by a show of hands, the opening, the introduction, getting people on board. Okay, great. How many of you would say just the middle part, the body, the substance? Okay? And how many of you would say the close? I would say the close. The conclusion is always the most difficult part to me, because once you've done your preparation and once you've brought somebody in, opening is not always easy either. Once you're in a flow, that's not too bad. But the closing is difficult because once you've introduced people to a topic or a subject and then you've taught on that subject, it's never really easy to know exactly how you're going to bring it to a close, because almost always you will want to have some response to what it is that you've just finished saying. And so that's why a lot of times, especially in more of the traditional churches, you'll have that altar call and people will come, they'll play music, and they'll invite you to come and kneel and pray or something like that. Many of you probably are from a tradition where they have that. There are other ways in which people can bring a sermon to a close. But it's not easy, okay? And that's where we find ourselves today. See, this is the 12th week of a 12-week series. We are at the end of a message series called His Way. We've been looking at the teachings of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. And I want us to look exactly at how Jesus closes His sermon. It's rather interesting, and then hopefully I will be able to bring some close to mine. But I think it's very interesting. Frank, if you could flip to me. beginning I showed this. This is the Mount of Beatitudes. This is where he's been doing his teaching. It's rather idyllic, isn't it? The Sea of Galilee is there down towards the top left corner, but he's up here, and it's a beautiful hillside. There's flowers, there's, buzzing bees and butterflies and birds. It's a beautiful setting. I've been there. It's wonderful, okay? And so he's been, over the course of the time, however long this sermon took, he has been introducing those people who have come to hear him speak to a better way of living. He wants them to know what it means to have a blessed life. And so as they're listening to him, their world is being turned upside down because what he's introducing them to is very different than what they thought. Many of them thought that their life would be better if they were the ones who were in control, if they were the ones who had the power, if they were the ones who had the money, if they were the ones who had the authority. They had in their minds this picture of what it meant to have a blessed life, and so do you and I. Many of us are not living the lives we want to have. There's this huge gap between where we are and where we want to be, and some of us think, if I just had a better job, if I just had more money, if I just had this relationship in place, if I just had, and we fill in the blank, and we think if we had those things, then we would have a blessed life. And what Jesus is trying to teach all of those who are on the hillside that day, who are battling with issues like anger and lust and need for more and idolatry and pride and prejudice and judgment, as he's speaking to them this day, he's telling them, listen, what a blessed life looks like has more to do with the condition of your heart than it does with the accumulation of any possession you'll have. It has more to do with who you are than it does with what you have. And you need to understand that. And so he has opened to them a new way of understanding about what it would look like if your heart were in good shape. And so as he moves to the end of this time, what he's going to do is draw to a close this message that we've been looking at. And he's going to give them a lot of different images and metaphors for them to think about. But at the end of the day, he's going to offer kind of his own altar call. He has an invitation. He has a challenge. He has something that he wants them to respond to. Because if you think about it, if you're there and you've been listening and you've been inspired on some level, you've been amazed, you think, gosh, this guy has more authority than anybody I've ever heard in my life, the question then becomes, so what? I mean, at the end of the day, really, who cares? He says all these things, but what am I supposed to do with that? I mean, when we leave this pretty place and I go back down into the demon-possessed valleys of life and I have to deal with my broken relationships and my lack of money and my addictions and all the issues that are facing me when we come down off this hill or when we leave out of this building, what am I supposed to do? He's just finished teaching me all these great things, but the question becomes, so what? And that's what I want you to think about, because really every Sunday, that's really kind of what you should be thinking about. As the Scriptures are open, and you understand them maybe in a new way or in a different way, and maybe in some sense your heart is touched, the question really becomes, wow, that was good, or I appreciate that, or that was valuable. The question is like, well, now what do I do with that? Because I know when I leave this building, my life's going to just come right back to me. And I'm appreciative for the 30 minutes, the 60 minutes, the 90 minutes, whatever time we have in this place. But now what do I do? And so that's what Jesus is going to say. He's going to, after having taught all of these things, he's going to invite them into a different way of living. And the issue is, for us, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about what it means, the difference between being an admirer or a follower of Jesus. Do you know there's a big difference between the two? An admirer just appreciates what they've heard. They just on some level have been spoken to and they've been touched in such a way that they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. But there's no commitment for an admirer. They can just go on and do whatever they want. And at the end of the day, they're going to call the shots to their lives. But for a follower, things are different for them. For a follower, there's this big word that represents a lifestyle. And that word is surrender. A follower of Christ has to surrender. They have to let go of all their hopes and dreams, of all the things that they thought were going to make for a better life. They have to surrender those. They have to release those and open to a new way of living, a way that Christ has laid out for them. And there's a big difference between the two. And I just want you to be thinking about, as we move through this final teaching, I want you to just think, am I an admirer of Jesus or am I a follower of Jesus? Because an admirer is going to go down a very different path than a follower goes down. And really, when it comes down to it, Jesus is going to say there really are only two paths. The one that this one's on, and the one that this one's on. He doesn't give us 3 or 4 or 10, he gives us 2. I wish there were more, but there are only 2 of those. And I want to look at what those are and what they look like. So if you would, Jesus, as he gives his final conclusion to his Sermon on the Mount, will be found in Matthew chapter 7. If you have a Bible and you want to follow, please do so. If not, that's where I'm at. You can pick that up maybe later. Take a look at it. Last week we finished with the teaching about the Golden Rule, and I asked you guys, I invited you to have a Golden Rule week, to look through life through the lens of the Golden Rule, where you do unto others that which you would have them do unto you. And I challenged you, I said, pick one person, 2 people, 5 people this next week, and make it your intention to bless them by doing unto them everything that you would want done yourself. And in order to be able to do that, you have to kind of get to know what their hopes and dreams are, what their fears are, what their struggles are. You have to understand where they're coming from so that you can speak into their life in such a way that it would actually bless them, not the way you want to be blessed, but the way that they want to be blessed. You have to get to know them. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands as to whether or not you did that, but that was my challenge for you. I hope that you did. Because I said to you that not only would that person's life be better, but yours would be better. Because that's what I find. I find that when I am giving up my life for the sake of another, that there's mutuality in that. That there's blessing in that. That not only are they left better for it, but I am too. That I move beyond my own self-absorption, and I come to a place where I can appreciate that what I give is blessing them and it blesses me. Well, anyway, we move past that last piece where we're talking about the Golden Rule, and Jesus gives what is the conclusion, the most difficult part of the Sermon on the Mount, in my opinion. And he says the following in verse 13. He says, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and its gate is wide for the many who choose that way. But the gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. The highway to hell, other than being a song that AC/DC song, it seemed cool when I was singing that song as a kid. It doesn't seem so cool when I'm reading it here. But there are 2 ways, right? Now, the highway to hell in the Greek, in the actual Greek, literal, it's the road to destruction, is what it means. So, there are these 2 gates, right? One is narrow, and one is wide. Now, as you read that, you say to yourself, well, why would anybody, if you knew that one gate was opening up to the highway to hell or the road to destruction, why would anybody go through that when they could go through the gate that leads to life, that leads to hopefulness, that leads to glory, that leads to being in the kingdom, in the presence of God? Why would anybody ever choose the wide way? Because it seems like what Jesus is saying is that most people do. You know, the wide way, the wide gate, allows you to take however much luggage you want. You can bring your anger, you can bring your lust, you can bring your judgments, you can bring your idols, you can bring whatever you want. You can just pack it all up. You can have others bring it with you. It's wide. You can take everything along with you. Okay? And you don't even have to be all that focused. You can just kind of drift along and find yourself at some point moving through to a life that perhaps you don't really want, but that requires really nothing of you. The reason why most people go through this gate is because it's easy. There's nothing required. I can just drift through this, and I can carry anything I want. I can bring it with me, no problem. The reason most people don't go through the narrow way is because it does require something of them. If I am to go into and through into the kingdom of heaven, remember the kingdom of heaven is that place where things are as God wants them to be. Okay? We're not talking about some ethereal place up in the clouds. We're talking about moving into a life that is life. A life where anger doesn't so reside in me that I hold such bitterness and angst towards you. Where the lust of my flesh do not rule the day. Where the idols in my life are not many. Where I look at you not through eyes of judgment. Remember the big log hanging out of our eye and we're looking at the speck in somebody else's? See, to walk through this way, this gate, means that I have to let go of those things. I can't forever hold on to my anger and my bitterness and my judgment and my lust. I have to let it go. The things that I have become in bondage to, addicted to, I have to release. I have to let go. There's not enough room for me to pass through this way with all that luggage, with all that baggage. And so if I don't let go, I simply have too much to be able to make it through here. I can make it through here, because here doesn't require anything of me. But I can't make it through here. Because if I bring all that stuff with me, I'm not comfortable in the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is a place where none of that stuff exists. None of that stuff has its way. None of that stuff holds its sway. I can't be comfortable hating other people and going through this gate. I can't be comfortable judging other people and going through this gate. Jesus is inviting us to a new way of living that impacts our hearts, the essence of who we are. And if I hold on to all this garbage, I'm not going to be comfortable in this kingdom. I'll be way more comfortable in this kingdom and not this one. And so he says, there are two ways, really. You've heard everything I've had to say. Now when we walk down this hill, you're going to walk through a gate. And you're going to go one way or the other. Which way are you going to go? You've been awed by my teachings. So what? It has had more authority than anybody you've ever heard. Who cares? What are you going to do when you walk down? Because you've got a life you've got to live. You're not going to stay up on this hill forever. You've got to go somewhere, and you've got to do something. Which way are you going? Do you want to hold on to your anger for the rest of your life and be a bitter person? Here you go. Here's the one for you. Do you want to be judgmental for the rest of your life, looking at others and finding ways in which they've disappointed you, let you down, and talk about them nastily with other people behind their back? Is this the way you want to go? Or do you want to just release them and forgive them, perhaps pray for them, ask God to be at work in their life so that the things that are impeding their blessing, blocking their blessing, can be released and they can go through this one too? What do you want? You're coming down the hill. We're not staying up here forever. We got stuff to do. Which way are you going? So then he continues. The reason people go through the wide gate is because it's easy. Nothing is required of them. You can have whatever you want, whenever you want. If that's what you want, here's your gate. But if you understand that the life that Jesus is calling to you requires some level of surrender, and you have to release those things, then there's a point for you to make a right turn instead of a left and come down. So he continues and he says this. He says, so then beware of the false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but really they're vicious wolves. He says you can identify them by the fruit. That is, by the way in which they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. So he gives you two pictures, two metaphors. He says, wolves in sheep's clothing. Now the wolf was the natural predator of the sheep, and that's why the shepherd had to guide them and protect them so that wolves couldn't come in and destroy them. And so he gives this picture of this wolf who's dressed up like a sheep. Why does he give this picture when he's talking about false prophets? He gives this picture of false prophets, A, because they existed and they had begun to do damage among those who were believers. And as they were doing damage, people couldn't yet see. They would make their way in. They didn't come to the door and say, "Hi, I'm a false prophet." They didn't come and say, "Hi, I'm a wolf under this sheep's clothing." They came charismatically. They came eloquently. They came with great gifts. But they came to lead astray those who were trying to go through this gate. And he says, you're going to run into those people when we get to the bottom of this hill and for the rest of the days of your life. He said, don't be so fooled by how they look. They may sound pretty, they might be super gifted, they may be charismatic and eloquent. But the truth of the matter is, if you want to know whether they're true or they're false, look at their life actions. He said, because you can, in a place like this, hide that for a while, but let their life be lived out among you for a little while. And after a period of time, they won't be able to hide what is true about their lives. So he said, like a good tree and a bad tree, when you go to inspect the fruit, a bad tree, a thorn bush, a thistles, can't produce good fruit. It's impossible. And he said, a good tree, a healthy tree, a fruit-bearing tree can't produce bad. He said, that's just the bottom line. So he said, if you want to know if somebody's true or false in what they're teaching you, just don't listen to what they say. Look at their life. But this is important because there are going to be a lot of false prophets in this day that rise up and try to lead the faithful followers of Jesus Christ astray, no different than today. You know, there are a lot of people who say a lot of things. And just because it sounds good doesn't mean it's true. He says, put on your discerning cap and don't just listen to what they say, because some people are super gifted. They really are. And when they speak, you'll be like, oh my gosh, could you believe that? He said, but look at their lives and see if whether their life lines up with their words. Look at the fruit, inspect the fruit, see if there is some sense of love that pervades their life, some sense of joy, some sense of peace, some sense of kindness, compassion. He said these things will be borne out. Paul wrote about this later to the church of the Galatians. He talked about the fruit of the Spirit being born in their lives. Look and see if that person has some level of self-control. Look at their lives, listen to their lives, see if they sing. And he said, if you see that their life actions are matching what they say, there's a much greater chance that they're going to be true than false. Don't be swayed by the gifts. Don't be swayed by the charisma. Don't be swayed by the eloquence. Though all of those things are good, look at their lives and see how they match up. And then you'll know if what they're peddling is true or false. Okay? And then he continues. He says, not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name, and we cast out demons in your name, and we performed many miracles in your name. But I will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. It's hard, right? I mean, it's like, so they're coming to the end, right? And there's this place that Jesus speaks of judgment. And he says there's these people there, and they're like, hey, Lord. And he's like, I'm sorry, I don't really know you. Who are you? He's like, Lord, Lord, did we know you? We were preaching in your name. There was that time we were casting out all those demons. It was a whole thing. did all these supernatural works. I said, I'm sorry, I have no idea who you are. He said, yeah, you know my name, and you know something about me, but you never let go of all the things that would have been required for you to have to walk through this way. He said, you were interested in the fireworks, and in the light shows, and in the super gifts. He said, but when it came to following me, you just weren't interested in the surrender part. You weren't interested in letting go of your hatred, and your anger, and your bitterness, and your judgment. You weren't interested in letting go of your lust, and your idolatry, your pride. He said, none of that was important to you. All you really cared about was the big splash. He said, yes, you know my name. And yes, you were even gifted in these ways. He said, but we didn't have any relationship at all. Your life was so out of alignment with what I was calling you to. You never cared at all to surrender in this way. And he says, to be honest, I don't know you. And then it's like just this big silence. Can't you imagine? Can you imagine in the place of this discussion where somebody could deceive themselves to think that just because they did all of these actions and knew all these names of God, somehow that they were going to be all right, when at the core, at their heart, they were rotten. There was no relationship whatsoever. There's a big difference between being an admirer and being a follower. I just need you to know that. Because I think that Jesus is really making that point here as he brings his sermon to a close. He says there are many people who will fill into buildings like this every week. And you will come and you will listen, he says, but really what's important is not so much that you were here, is what you did with what you heard when you leave. And you get back to your house, and you get back to your workplace, and you get back to school. He said, really what's going to be important is if you did something with what you heard. He said, because you can accumulate a lot of knowledge and know a lot of stuff and do nothing with it. I'm calling you to a way of life. I'm calling you to obedience. I'm calling you to surrender. I'm calling you to become the kind of person that you were made to be. But in order for you to do that, you've got to let some stuff go. Because there's no way you can enter this life as burdened down and with as much baggage as you have. You've got to let some of this stuff go. In fact, you've got to let it all go. And you're like, yeah, but I went to church like a bunch, man. And I read the Bible some, and I even invited my friends to Easter service, and I got up early for the sunrise service. That's got to count for something. I'm calling you to a way of life. I'm calling you to a way of life. And it's not going to be for all. In fact, he said most are going to choose this way. And it's going to blow my mind. Because like what I'm calling you to actually is life. The one and only life. It's just going to require something of you. But I'm telling you, it's worth it. Yeah, but... Did you see that? Yeah, but... I'm not calling you to come to church. I'm calling you to a way of living. A way of living. That means the next time somebody offends you, what's your response going to be? That means the next time somebody hurts you, the next time somebody asks something of you, what is your response going to be? Is it going to mirror image that which I've shown you? Or are you just going to be prideful, self-absorbed, stubborn, hateful, bitter, angry? What are you going to be? I'm calling you to a way of life, a new way of life. And he moves his way towards the close, and then he says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it, turn to your neighbor and say, follows it. Follows it. Anyone who listens to my teaching and sure you all are. He says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it's built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. And when the rains and floods come and the winds beat against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Did you notice that both houses, talking about your lives, he says everybody's life is a house, right? Some people's houses are built on very solid, firm foundations. Other people are built on foundations that they didn't have time for. They just had to put that thing up quickly. There's no real firm footing. So when the storms come, and by the way, did you realize that storms come to both houses? Sometimes we get this thought in our head that, like, if we're Christians, if we do our part, then God has to do his part and take a lot of the storms out of our lives. And if it wasn't true for Jesus, then it's not going to be true for us. And I don't know that we endured any greater storms than Jesus himself. And so, that's just the way it's going to be. You and I are going to have storms that come our way. And sometimes those storms are nasty. And some of us might be in the middle of one of those right now. And the question for you and I is, well, what foundation do you have? Is the foundation strong enough to sustain the storm that's hitting us right now? Because sometimes the storm can so rock our house that it levels it. And the only reason that a storm will ever level a house is if the foundation wasn't strong enough to endure the storm. We know something about that, right? We've been visited by a few of those in recent days and weeks. So when I'm hearing this, what I'm thinking is, what is the foundation of what I'm building my life on? I mean, it's an important question for you to think about as you move from this place to the next. What's my foundation? Like, I was hoping that this last storm was going to be the last storm. Barely made that one. I have to tell you, not to ruin your parade, but your last storm is probably not your last one. I'm no prophet, but I would imagine given the state of what I've experienced and observed over the course of my life, there's probably another one coming. And Jesus says it won't be such a big deal if there's a foundation, like you can sustain it. But he says if there's nothing really below the surface, like it's that hidden part. Nobody sees the foundation, right? They see the house. They say, man, what a nice house, what a great house. Nobody really sees the foundation. It's the same way in your life. You can present to people anything you want to present, can't you? You can dress up and look nice, and you can exercise and get fit, and you can be in great shape. But what's beneath that facade? What is underneath all of that? Jesus says is really what's going to hold you when your life gets crashed by the next storm coming your way. So basically, the essence of it is, what is the foundation upon which you are building your life upon? And is it solid enough to sustain the next thing coming your way? This is what he's asking these folks on a hill, but it's what he's asking you and me. And then listen to what happens. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. They got up and they gave him like a standing ovation. Woo! Awesome! Way to go, Jesus! Nice work! Way to be! I don't think he was looking for that. They were amazed. They were stunned. They were in awe. They were like, but he's like, okay, now it's time to leave. We're going to go down this nice, pretty place. We're going down the hill. Watch your step. Watch your step. Look out for that. Where are you going now that we're at the bottom of the hill? what are you going to do? Right? If we stop there, you wouldn't know exactly what hits Jesus next, but what knowing him might you imagine comes next for Jesus? Is it going to be like this really nice idyllic setting continues on for him, or is he going to move into something that's like a storm? The next things that come his way, according to chapter 8, are leprosy, paralysis, fever and sickness, demon possession, and a whole bunch of people who need something from him showing up at his door. That's chapter 8. And you know what? That's what's happening in chapter 8 of your life too. When you leave this place, demon possession, paralysis, leprosy, sickness. Have a nice day. Goodbye, everybody. What am I saying? What I'm saying is, it's easy here. When you leave these doors, I bet there will be something before day's end that you will be confronted by that's not so easy. The same problems that you brought in, you will leave with. And I bet there's more than one or two of us who came in with a problem or two. And Jesus is saying, as we walk down this pretty little hill, we walk out these doors and go back to our lives, what he's saying is, do you want to just admire me or do you want to follow me? He said, if you follow me, we're going to be confronted immediately with leprosy. But he says, watch what happens in the face of leprosy when I touch it. Watch what happens. Watch what happens in the face of sickness. Watch what happens in the face of bondage when I speak into that. He said, demons will flee. He said, so something really good's going to happen, but you're going to have to go through some storms. You going to go through it with me, or are you just going to find a different path? Because, I'm not a big fan of leprosy. Or demon possession. Or paralysis. If given my choice when I wake up to start a day, I'd like to avoid those as best I can. Right? They said, no, avoid it. You can avoid it through this way. You can see it and go to the other side of the street. You can understand when confronted by something that you don't want to deal with. He said, you can look at it and move into it in my name and with my grace, or you can turn your head and walk the other way. Which one are you going to do? There's a big difference between an admirer and being a follower of Jesus. Which one am I? So now we're at that part of the service that I said was a really hard part. Like the introduction, body, closing. I can get the musicians to come back and play some pretty little music, make us some candles and make us a nice little altar. And I can appeal to your emotions to come real here and make a response. Whether you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you're just going to be an admirer of Jesus. I can give you a little trinket. I can create some scenario where I enable you to respond to it. And I thought about all of those things this week, actually. I thought about what do I do to close this message, this series. My invitation to you is very, very basic. It's very simple. We're coming down off this hill. When we get to the bottom, we have a decision that we have to make. When we leave these doors, no matter how emotional your response was in this place, ultimately you're going to need gas in the tank going down the road. You need more than just for today. You need for tomorrow and the next and the next and the next. Every day, every moment, Lord, I need you. Every hour, I need you. And in those moments where we lose touch with that, guess what happens? We drift just a little bit. Drift just a little bit. And then before we know it, we're going on a way. It's just not his way. I want to be a follower of Jesus myself. But I realize how hard it is. It's hard for me too. It's hard for me too. Because I'm not all that different than you. I have a lot of the choices that I make don't always feel good. But I'm not looking for good feelings always. I'm looking for walking in a rightness of way. And I invite you to do the same. I invite you when you leave this place today, tomorrow, the next day, revisit his teachings. Look at chapter 5 and chapter 6 and chapter 7. Live with that a while. See what he asks of you. And then ask yourself, am I willing to pay that price? I invite you to be a follower of Jesus Christ because it's the best way. If there were a better way, I'd give it to you. It's the best way. It's just not the easiest. Let's pray. In just a moment, we're going to leave this place. For some of us, we will leave this place and nothing will change. There will be another seed planted, and perhaps it will one day grow into a tree that bears fresh fruit, good life. But not yet. And then there are others of us whose hearts are beating just a little bit faster at the thought of what it would mean to follow him. Today is going to be a turning point for you. Today is going to be a day where you do leave with a little less baggage, a little less luggage. You're going to get to the bottom of the hill, you're going to turn out of the parking lot, you're going to determine that there's a life you want, and it's not the one you've been living. And step by step, you're going to make a choice that leads to life. This day, God speak to our hearts and lead us in the next step